Hi everybody, it's Doug. Wanted to thank you all for joining me, and I especially want to thank my new subscribers that I've picked up recently. And for sending those subscribers, I want to especially thank Dark Arts Lock Picking, Chris Capune, and The Helpful Lock Picker, all of whom have contributed to sending you folks my way. And I appreciate that, and I appreciate you. So, you've heard me talk about acquiring a bunch of residential locks from a man who was acting as his own landlord or his own locksmith for a local landlord. I've been very curious about residential locks and whether they were easy or hard to get into. I mean, these things are sort of the last barrier between the outside world and your valuables. So you would hope that they would be difficult to get into. But I had heard that they were pretty vulnerable to raking. So took the first lock and started experimenting with the rake. It popped right open. Maybe it was just the lock. Next lock. Get in there with the rake. And when I'm speaking of raking, I also speak in terms of raking and rocking, because sometimes you have to do a little bit of rocking. And finally, started to check a different brand of lock that was also within there. And same results. Residential locks generally are pretty vulnerable, at least this set. Newer ones, quick sets, started doing their smart key. Those locks fight a bit harder. Now, these things, going back to my white and orange belt days, these things gave me so much stress trying to get open through single pin pick. But what about a rake? No match there. No match at all. So I got excited and I thought, geez, why can't I just rake everything? Well, there's a whole bunch of reasons not to. Number one, these things are like saw blades. They're very, very rough on the insides of the lock. And while you will be able to get the lock open in a hurry, there's going to be a limited amount of time that you'll get away with it before you end up changing the bitting by taking off so much of the pins, or catching something inside the lock and ripping it out, because you'll see these things are very, very grabby. Also, it's pretty hard on the rake. Rakes often break and end up leaving a piece inside the lock. Not fun. Another problem is that when you look at the bottom of keyway tension and the height of the rake, those add up to being taller than many keyways. So getting your tension and your rake in there, it's kind of hard. You can use top of keyway tension when you're raking, but you have to be very careful that the rake doesn't catch and pull the tensioner right out and throw it across the room. Also, the newer locks, like I mentioned, most people still have older locks on their doors, but newer locks are a little bit more aggressive bitting, so a high-low is going to be less vulnerable to something like a city rake. And also, that front pin, you have to watch out, because if the front pin is really, really high, your rake may not catch that, and you end up having to hit that pin all on your own. Many locks, the more sophisticated locks, when you get to Medico, where you have to rotate the pins and so on, are much less vulnerable to raking. When you start adding security pins with spools, when you start adding serrated pins, those things are going to make it harder to rake. So you're going to have to learn single pin at some point. And if you wait until you find that lock that you can no longer rake your way into, you're probably already up to a green belt lock, and starting to single pin pick on a green belt lock, when that's your first experience with it, is going to be a nightmare. So while you are still in the lower belts, that's your time to start working with single pin picking, when the lock's going to talk back to you and you get very clear language back. I don't recommend the Master 3 for single pin picking because it's just going to make you crazy. However, the Master 140, you do get good enough feedback that you're going to feel what's going on. And then as you progress, you'll understand more what's going on. Also, learning spools and serrated pins will be much easier when you're working on single pin picking with one of these lower belt locks. So, beyond that, you have to learn tensioning. And tensioning requires very subtle changes sometimes, especially when you get to something like an ABUS, the ADTI 50. These things, harder tension, lighter tension, varies as you get further into the pick. So, is there ever a good time for raking? Do you throw raking out the window entirely? No, not at all. The best start use for raking, besides getting into these very low-level locks, is to rake up a false set. That's a phrase that I actually picked up from Bosnian Bill. So as he's picking, he'll be like, oh, well, let's see if we can rake up a false set. The action of raking will often expose the spools and security pins that are deeper in there that you might have to spend a while single pin picking until you get to. Once I saw Bosnian Bill take a challenge lock, start raking it, it popped right open. So there's a reminder when you start building challenge locks, do try raking them because they might be very hard to single pin pick and very easy to rake. So here with the ABUS ADTI 50, the Titanium, what I'm going to do is start, take note of where the tensioner is. I'm going to start by raking and applying a little bit of tension, and I'm already starting to see a little bit of a false set. I'm going to keep on going. Rocking and raking till I get myself a nice deep false set, and there it is. That saved me what used to be the first 2 or 3 minutes of my pick. Now I can get in there, now that that's all set, and start looking for the remaining pins. Which are now very, very easy to find, or at least once you're experienced enough with the lock. Got that one mushroom spool pin. One mushroom pin fighting me, but working my way back. And there we go. So basically, where I used to spend 2 or 3 minutes working my way into that false set, that got me way ahead, and then I was able to finish off the lock pretty quickly. So, rake or SPP? The answer is both. Thanks everybody for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you again. Take care, folks.